Let's try something a little different today. Last night, I was watching Sneaker Talk TCG, shoutouts to him, and they were doing a Q&A video, and I was like, you know what? I think we have enough of a community here that maybe we can get some questions, and I can take my best attempt at answering any sort of pressing questions you have in mind. So today, I'm going to go through your questions and try my best to answer them. I'm Jeff from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, get some popcorn or a nice beverage, and let's have a chat. First question comes from Adrian, who asks, what is your thoughts with the new set coming out? And I will admit, I was a little lukewarm going into this. The big deal is the whole Ogerpon thing, and based on my initial thoughts on those Ogerpon cards and seeing how they're doing / not doing in Japan, I was a little lukewarm on the whole thing. However, Dragapult does give me hope. Dragapult VMAX is one of my all-time favorite decks, and I'm really excited to see Dragapult return with a very similar playstyle and similar attacks. If anything, it's just better now. Though it is a stage 2, it's going to be a little more difficult to set up, but I am very much looking forward to sniping the bench with Dragapult EX. And one of the interesting things, I put out the video looking at a bunch of deck lists from Japan and talking about Dragapult being the best deck, and there were a lot of people who were like, I'm really happy to see Charizard get taken down. And I think it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, I know a lot of people are tired of Charizard. We see Charizard everywhere. It's so good. However, Charizard is, I think, one of the weaker best decks we've seen in some time. Like, I'm someone who, while I only started a couple of years ago, I lived through Mew VMAX and Fusion Strike. I lived through Lugia and Silver Tempest, which might literally be the best deck ever made. And Charizard is not on that level. But now we have Dragapult EX coming, and unlike Charizard, you can't hit Dragapult for weakness, right? The Pokemon Company could have just put out a good grass deck, and Charizard could have been like nerfed. But it's going to be harder to do that with Dragapult because it does not have weakness that we can exploit. We're going to have to find other ways to take down Dragapult, and I have my concerns that people are going to be even more sick of Dragapult in the long run because it's just going to be harder to take down. Nevertheless, still excited for Dragapult. There are some other cards in the set that I'm looking forward to. I think Greninja EX could be kind of cool, sort of a return of that playstyle of Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. I think Blood Moon Ursaluna is a really cool end game attacker you can splash in a bunch of different decks. And then there are some really good ace specs coming out as well, such as Secret Box and of course Unfair Stamp, which looks absolutely busted. So I am decently looking forward to Twilight Masquerade. Maybe not as much as, say, I think I was more excited for Temporal Forces and Paradox Rift, but this set is looking pretty good. Second one comes from Brendan Larson, who says, not so much a question, but maybe some topic / future video ideas. One, what are people playing expanded? Maybe a couple deck profiles, maybe a game or two. I don't play or know anything about expanded, so I am not the guy for that. However, Stefan Ivanov, I believe, I'll put a picture over here on Twitter. They have been doing some tweets on expanded decks, so definitely check them out. I'll put the picture right here. 2, overview of basic staple cards / engines for newer players. This is something I have kicked around in my head for some time. I think part of me is like, that's a lot of work to do, and part of me is like, that video is going to be obsolete every 2-3 months when they put out a new set. So I'm kind of like, I don't know what the best way to do that is without having to remake that video every 2 to 3 months, but I do agree that having some sort of video that's like, here are all the essential Pokemon and the essential trainer cards, I think that would be a really valuable asset for the community to have. The fourth one, something GLC related. I don't know anything about GLC other than the core concept of it, so I can't speak to that at all. But this last one, deck profile of your favorite historical deck. All right, let's go. I've only been around for a couple years. I think my all-time favorite deck is Mew VMAX. However, we have some, I think it's really relevant in light of some recent news. We're going to go talk about some Dragapult VMAX. While Dragapult originally came out in Rebel Clash, it really hit its peak in the Evolving Skies era. It was the #1 deck in that block with a meta share on Limitless of 11%, winning over half of its games. And this was my favorite deck to play at the time. I've pulled up an example list here, and this was such a fun deck to play. Dragapult VMAX, just for reference, it's got a shred attack for 1 psychic energy does 60 damage, which was fine. You could get through walling Pokemon. And then Max Phantom for 2 psychic energy, 130 damage, and you put 5 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like. Now, even at the time, 130 was not the best. However, Dragapult was a very tanky Pokemon, and those 5 damage counters really added up, especially if you were playing against 3 prize Pokemon, where you could be potentially dropping upwards of 150 damage on a VMAX on the bench, and you would eventually just get to a point where you're taking multiple prizes, and you could just use it to snipe out smaller targets on the bench as well. And we had even more bench sniping besides Dragapult in this deck, including Quick Shooting Inteleon VMAX, where once during your turn, you could put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, giving you even more firepower there. And then Galarian Zigzagoon, you would just put this on the bench and you could put a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. And then we even had Scoop Up Net as well. So not only could we could do some really nasty plays where we reuse a Zigzagoon to drop another 10, you could even scoop up your Quick Shooting Inteleon, put it on another Drizzile, and then drop another 2 shots. So tons of bench sniping in this deck. And then we have to talk about Shady Dealings Drizzile here, where this was one of the best draw engines ever. You just once you evolve from Sobble to Drizzile, you get to just grab a trainer card of your choice and put it into your hand, which was phenomenal. You'd set up multiple Sobbles, you get multiple Drizziles to just grab a whole bunch of pieces, and you were rolling. And then Shady Dealings Inteleon let you grab 2 cards, so 2 trainer cards, which was even better. And then yeah, there were turns where you could get 2 cards with Shady Dealings Inteleon, then you play the Scoop Up Net, and then you put that on another, you evolve this up again, and then you get 4 cards in 1 turn. Absolutely nuts. Like, amazing for consistency. And then for draw supporters, we've got Marnie, which is like sort of like Iono, but kind of worse and more random. Professor's Research, of course, great card. Boss's Orders. There was Crushing Hammers in this deck. Because we weren't doing a lot of damage, we are looking to disrupt our opponents. 4 Crushing Hammer could be devastating or nothing, depending on how bad you coin flip. I really miss this era of Pokemon search between Fog Crystal, Quick Ball, Evo Incense, and Level Ball. Finding Pokemon was so much. Even now, like, I know Ultra Ball is great, but like the combination of Quick Ball and Evo Incense was just so good. And then we had, like, this is one of the first big decks to really use Path to the Peak to slow down rule box Pokemon. Tool Jammer was really nice in this deck to stop other sort of things like Choice Belts and whatnot. And then Horror Energy, where if your opponent attacked you, you got to put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon, and this was per Horror Energy. So if you had 2 energy, they're adding another 4 damage. So like, you weren't necessarily hitting the hardest, but you were getting so much extra incremental damage along the way. All right, I'm going to stop geeking out about Dragapult VMAX, but this deck was a ton of fun, and I look forward to this style of deck returning in Twilight Masquerade with Dragapult EX. Next one comes from LeBlond James 8092, who asks, do you think Miraidon can come back in this new format? And I'm personally really sad about the fall to irrelevancy for Miraidon EX, because it was my favorite deck last year. It was the deck I played at Toronto Regionals, and Miraidon is one of like almost every deck pre-rotation survived post-rotation except for Entei, Iron Valiant, and Miraidon. And it's really sad to see that Miraidon just isn't relevant anymore. And unfortunately, it just got hit really bad, losing Path to the Peak for that sort of control element, losing Flaffy for consistent energy acceleration, and losing Peony for the turbo versions of Miraidon to help you get those electric generators very quickly has just made it not as good as it once was. And like compounding things is the fact that there are a lot of good turbo decks in the game right now, such as Roaring Moon to Dunsparce, and in particular Future Hands, which is basically just the 2024 version of Miraidon, and a lot of people that would have been playing Miraidon are just playing Future Hands now instead. So it's not even necessarily that Miraidon's bad. I do still see some people playing it in limitless tournaments, and in particular in Japan. The Japanese results always seem to have Miraidon on them. People still love Miraidon and still play it and still do decently well. I just think that the community at large has moved on to other similar decks that have a similar playstyle that don't have the same faults that Miraidon currently has. Now, is Miraidon dead forever? I don't think so. I think its ability is just so good at helping it set up. Electric Generator is still a great card. It might just need an extra couple of pieces to really bring it back up to prominence, but I would not count out Miraidon forever. So I would, keep my fingers crossed. I don't necessarily think it's dead. Maybe like in the immediate term, right? In this current temporal forces format, I don't necessarily see Miraidon spiking and just winning a tournament out of the blue. I think that there is not enough support for that card right now in terms of like the card pool, as well as the community putting time and effort behind it to find better ways to play it. But I would not rule it out going forward as new cards come into the format, and possibly Miraidon gets a boost from new cards that will come out in the future. Gyro Totson 9277, apologies if I messed up the pronunciation of the name, but they ask, why didn't everyone put effort into Future Box that they did with Iron Hands? Now, this one is an interesting question. Let's head over to I'm going to pull up an example list here so we can just talk about it in a little more detail. Here's a list I pulled up on Limitless, and take everything I say here with a grain of salt, because I actually have not played Future Box yet. I have played Future Hands, but I have not played Future Box. And I think the fundamental hurdle with Future Box is that there's a lot going on in this deck. And I understand the general idea of wanting to have counters for everything, and the general idea is you're going to start attacking with the Miraidon and pick the appropriate attacker, but it feels like so much work to try and get the right attacker, whether it's Iron Hands or Iron Leaves or Iron Shreds or Iron Boulder or Iron Valiant rolling. And this is already, like, I've played Future Hands, and that's a deck that is already prone to bricking, and you're only using mostly lightning energy and maybe one or two psychic energy, but you're almost always just going to the Iron Hands, and maybe you'll finish with the Miraidon at the end as a desperation attack. And that in and of itself, and you have electric generators and stuff, and that is already a deck that is prone to bricking. So once you add in, let's see how many energy type, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different energies, and then like all of these different attackers, this feels like an absolute nightmare to run on a game-by-game basis. This might be an amazing deck, but it just feels like so much work. And on top of that, I just have concerns with Future Box and like what happens when that first big attacker goes down, right? Yeah, Iron Leaves comes in and knocks out a Charizard. Great. Charizard gets the return KO on Iron Leaves. Are you then going to be consistent enough to get that reboot pod and like hit the energy switches to get that next attacker rolling? Like, it just feels like too much work to me relative to other decks in the format to try and manage. So at least at this point in time, this feels like too messy of a deck for me to play, and it feels like I'm not alone in here. Future Box is not seeing much play or much success on a grand scale. I would love to be proven wrong, but I don't know if I think there's just too much going on with this deck right now, which is why people have gravitated more towards the Future Hands build. And I could even see like if it was just Iron Leaves, if it was a stronger attacker, but it's not so much that like Iron Hands is amazing. I think it's a really good card, but it's the fact that Iron Hands gives you're only dealing with one type of energy, primarily one attacker, and it kind of cuts the inconsistencies out, and you have a very straightforward game plan versus this where there's just way too much going on, in my opinion. Last question comes from Frame Andy, who asks, how do you think the TCG or playing Pokemon in general can be more inclusive of genders? Maybe this question's out of your scope, but I kind of been rattling an essay thesis in my head. It seems every tournament is male dominated, but plenty of us girls kick butt at the game. Maybe it's a commitment issue, but I don't know. First off, definitely follow through on that essay. I am someone who's all for inclusivity in the Pokemon trading card game, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this subject. And yes, there are a number of awesome women in the Pokemon trading card game. I'm going to shout out a couple right now. Let me pull up my notes here real quick. Shout outs to Frosted Caribou, who is one of the YouTube creators that got me into the Pokemon trading card game. I love watching her videos, and I love when she's opening packs. She's also talking about the gameplay ramifications of the cards she's opening. Shoutouts to Piper Lapine, amazing player. Shoutouts to Pumpkin Amy, who is also part of the... Oh, Frosted Caribou also does commentary for Pokemon, as does Pumpkin Amy, and she's also a streamer and hosts events for the community, which is fantastic. Shoutouts to Natalie Millar, amazing player. Poke Amy, amazing player. And shoutouts to everyone from Girl Power TCG. Shoutouts to Hazy Cats, who is the definitive expert on Shadow Rider Calyrex. I have spotlighted her deck on at least one time formally on the stream, and probably every other Shadow Rider deck has been influenced by their builds as well. I am all for in support of inclusivity for all walks of life. Now, taking on the gender inclusivity, that's very much out of my scope. I don't necessarily know if I have the answer to that. And, you know, as someone who is a cis male who makes a YouTube channel, and like I'll let you peek behind the curtain here, my YouTube viewership is about 95% male. So I don't necessarily know if I have the answers to this, and I don't necessarily see myself as like someone actively trying to make content for men. I try and approach it in the sense that I do want, like, I think about it in inclusivity in the sense of like people who are new to the Pokemon trading card game, regardless of what gender or race or how old you are. I'm definitely trying to make content to bring more people into the game. And I always look at it through the lens of like, when I started playing the Pokemon trading card game, what sort of content would have helped me get into the Pokemon trading card game? What content was I missing from what's not out there that's being made that could be made to help me or someone like me get into the game? And I think there is a lot of opportunity for other creators to make more content in that regard and bringing more people into the game. Now, when it comes to like as big of a subject as like gender, again, I am not necessarily the person who would be the best to answer that question, but I am in full support of, you know, this game being as inclusive as it can be, and trying to be an ally in bringing as many people to the Pokemon trading card game as possible, because it's awesome, and I think it's awesome for everyone, and more people should be welcomed into the scene to try this game out and have fun, whether you just want to play the game with your kid or your significant other or your friends on the kitchen countertop, or you want to make a run at the World Championships. I think this game is for everyone. And there we go. That was just a handful of questions that you asked. Again, thank you to everybody who asked questions. Apologies if I wasn't able to get to your question in this one. I think depending on how this video does, maybe we'll do another one of these. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy this style of video. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.